for after this talk, maybe you should go, if you have time, on this website called Mapping Inequality by richmond.edu. And they have the original maps for, you can look up Los Angeles, it does it for every county. Look up Los Angeles, look at a current Black neighborhood, and find the map that they did in 1934, it's the same racial makeup. Here's why. They went around the country mapping every little district and saying how risky was it. And you can see in the comments what they said. And it's really eye-opening, because they will say things like this. This is a Black neighborhood, and therefore it's risky. This is a low-class Mexican neighborhood. This is inharmonious races. They are so explicit that race is the #1 reason that they're using. Here's why that's important. So this is the start of the middle class in America. It's not that middle class people got mortgages. It's if you got a mortgage, you got to be middle class. That's when it starts in 1934, after the Great Depression. Everyone's living in a tenement in Manhattan, so I'm from New York. So $50 you're paying in rent, and then the white family gets to move to Levittown, Pennsylvania, or some suburb, pay $35 on a mortgage, build equity, and the Black family gets to stay in the city and pay more in rent because the resources are gone. The buses now are just the city where everyone else is doing cars. What does that affect? It's your schools, right? Which neighborhoods are policed? Which neighborhoods are the environmental disasters made in? And the way that this was enforced, so 1934 is those maps, and literally the FHA just would not guarantee a loan in a red line neighborhood because they were Black. And it wasn't because they were not just like KKK people. These were it was risky. Back then, there was race science that the Nazis ended up using, that said that certain people were inferior. I mean, this was just deeply scientific at the time. Okay, so science was also infected with this. And the way that developers would, get loans from the FHA is they would have to build a wall. So there's a couple, one in St. Louis and one in Detroit, where a white neighborhood got too close to a Black neighborhood, so they built a wall so that they could get FHA loans. And every house that was sold from 1934 until 1970, and it was malpractice not to include it, had a thing called a racial covenant, which is part of the contract that said in it very explicitly, you may not sell this house to anyone who's not white Caucasian. Okay, that was it until the Supreme Court stopped enforcing it in 1970. 1970. Okay, so that builds the middle class. You look at Orange County. Orange County is a creation of white flight and the FHA. So you look at the topography of the nation, right? Where PPP loans. Who got PPP loans? Where are the environmental disasters? Look at the school district funding. Where is it over police? Where George Floyd was killed? That was a red line neighborhood. Altadena, I'm sure, was a red line neighborhood. And you track those to today, and those exist. So you actually don't even have to go back to slavery. Now, the myths that caused the racism that caused the New Deal to happen that way do go back to racism. Because when you have an entire economic structure built on a myth of racial hierarchy, and then you get rid of the structure, but you don't get rid of the myths, those myths recreate that same racial hierarchy in new means. And that's where we're at. That's why we're canceling DEI. Because you've got 20 guys that are hoarding the nation's wealth, and who are they blaming? The DEI offices? That they are the ones creating the unfairness of this rigged economy, that it's the Black people's fault? That Elon Musk has more money than he and his children and great-great-grandchildren? His money is growing faster. This is how capital works. His money is growing faster than he can ever spend it. That's how capital works. Okay? So that's not fair. And he is saying this economy is not fair. Why? Because women and minorities are getting ahead of the line. And the implication is that he got there as meritocracy, that it's a meritocracy that we live in. That's how deep this stuff goes. It's ugly. The stuff that's coming out right now is old race science stuff. I mean, this was stuff that should have been buried with the Nazis, but it turned out the Nazis weren't buried, because they're back too.
Absolutely.